I wanted to get rid of the dog, but now I can't forgive myself. I never imagined I'd find myself in this position. Sitting on my kitchen floor, knees pulled to my chest, and my dog Daisy curled up beside me, her big brown eyes staring into mine as if she could sense every ounce of guilt dripping off me. Daisy wasn't just a pet, she was my shadow, my comfort after a long day, and my reason to get up on mornings when everything else felt too heavy. But lately, I'd been failing her. I work long hours at a job I used to love, but now only tolerate. When I adopted Daisy 3 years ago, I had a flexible schedule and a vibrant social life that often included her, hikes on weekends, long walks after work, lazy afternoons at dog-friendly cafes. But life changed. My hours got longer, my energy got lower, and slowly, Daisy's leash began collecting dust by the door. It wasn't just the lack of time, though. It was the vet bills stacking up because of her allergies, the anxiety I felt every time I had to leave her alone for yet another 10-hour stretch, and the gnawing guilt that I couldn't provide her the life she deserved. I'd been avoiding this thought for weeks, months even, but it was becoming harder to ignore. Daisy needed more than me. I tried to push it away as I scratched behind her ears, her tail thumping gently against the floor. But the thought kept clawing its way back into my mind. I had to let her go, and somehow, just admitting it felt like the cruelest betrayal. The moment I decided to let Daisy go, a wave of nausea hit me. It felt like I was giving up on her, on us. I spent the next few days trying to convince myself I was overthinking it. Maybe I could rearrange my schedule, find a dog walker, cut back on other expenses to afford her vet care, but the truth was, I'd already tried all of that. My job wasn't getting any less demanding, and dog walkers could only do so much. Daisy didn't just need someone to let her out for 15 minutes a day, she needed someone who could be there. Someone who wouldn't come home every night too exhausted to play or take her for a long walk. I couldn't keep delaying the inevitable. So, one night after work, I sat down on my couch, my laptop balanced on my knees, and Daisy curled up beside me with her head resting on my leg. Her soft snores filled the quiet room as I hesitated, my fingers hovering over the keyboard, looking for a loving home for my sweet dog, Daisy. She's 3 years old, gentle, and loves people. She deserves more time, more care, and more love than I can currently give her. I stared at the words for an hour before hitting post. My stomach felt hollow. The responses started coming in almost immediately, some from well-meaning families, others from people I couldn't quite trust. I became obsessed with vetting every reply, checking their profiles, asking detailed questions. One message stood out. A woman named Lisa, a retired teacher with a big fenced backyard, and a golden retriever named Max. She wrote paragraphs about her daily routine, about how she loved spending her mornings gardening while her dog played nearby. I wanted to feel relieved. Instead, I felt like I was about to hand over a piece of my heart to a stranger. When I finally agreed to set up a meeting, Daisy was asleep next to me, blissfully unaware of the decision I'd made. I brushed my hand over her soft fur and whispered, "I'm so sorry, Daisy." And for the first time in a long while, I cried. Lisa suggested we meet at a nearby dog park on a Saturday morning. It was neutral ground, a place where Daisy could run freely, and I could see how she interacted with Lisa and Max that morning. I felt like I was walking toward a firing squad. Daisy, on the other hand, was thrilled. Her tail wagged excitedly as she sniffed every bush and lamppost along the way. She had no idea what this meeting was about, and that made it so much harder. Lisa was already there when we arrived. She was an older woman with kind eyes and a warm smile. Max, her golden retriever, was lounging nearby, lazily chewing on a stick. "Is this Daisy?" Lisa asked, kneeling to greet her. Daisy, ever the social butterfly, trotted right over and plopped herself down in front of Lisa, accepting scratches behind her ears. For a moment, I felt hope flicker in my chest. Lisa was gentle, patient, and spoke to Daisy like she was an old friend. Max even wandered over, sniffed Daisy, and gave her a playful nudge, but as I watched them interact, a sharp ache formed in my chest. This was the right decision, wasn't it? Lisa could offer Daisy what I couldn't: time, attention, love without distractions. Lisa stood up and smiled at me. "She's wonderful. You've taken such good care of her." I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. "She deserves better than what I can give her now." We talked logistics, Lisa asked about Daisy's routines, her allergies, her favorite treats. Every question reminded me that I was about to hand over my best friend to someone else. When the conversation ended, Lisa said something that surprised me. "I can tell you love her deeply. This isn't an easy choice." I blinked back tears and managed a small nod. "Take your time," she added. "I'll be here if you decide this is what's best." I looked down at Daisy, who was happily rolling in the grass next to Max. For a brief second, the world felt still and cruelly peaceful, but the truth was, I wasn't ready to say goodbye. "Not yet. Can I think about it for a little longer?" I asked. Lisa smiled warmly. "Of course." As Daisy and I walked home that day, her leash in my hand and her tail wagging at every passing squirrel, I felt the crushing weight of uncertainty settle back onto my shoulders. After our meeting with Lisa, I thought I'd feel relieved. Like I had more time to make the right choice, to prepare myself for the inevitable. But instead, the days that followed felt heavier, like I was dragging around a secret too big to carry. Daisy didn't notice. She was her usual, goofy self, nudging me with her nose when I forgot to fill her water bowl, curling up next to me while I worked late into the night, and running to the door with her tail wagging every time I picked up her leash. But the guilt. Oh, the guilt. I couldn't shake the feeling that every happy moment we shared was laced with betrayal. Every time I scratched behind her ears or handed her a treat, I'd catch myself wondering if it would be one of our last moments together. Lisa had messaged me a couple of times, just gentle check-ins, no pressure at all. "Just wanted to see how you and Daisy are doing." I couldn't bring myself to reply. One evening, after a particularly long day at work, I came home to find Daisy lying by the door, her head resting on her paws. She hadn't touched her food, and when I knelt down to pet her, she barely lifted her head. "Hey, girl," I whispered. "What's wrong?" Her eyes, usually so bright and full of mischief, looked dulled. At first, I thought it was just a bad day. Maybe she missed me, maybe she was tired. But by the next morning, she still wasn't eating. By that evening, she was struggling to get up. I rushed her to the vet, panic clawing at my chest the entire drive. The sterile smell of the clinic hit me as I carried Daisy inside, her head drooping against my arm. The vet ran some tests, speaking in calm, measured tones that did nothing to soothe me. When she finally returned to the exam room, her expression told me everything before she even spoke. "Her kidneys are failing," the vet said softly. "It's advanced. We can try treatment, but it's unlikely to change the outcome." I felt like the air had been knocked out of me. "How long?" I choked out. "A few days, maybe a week." "I'm so sorry." I nodded, tears already blurring my vision. Daisy, still curled up on the exam table, lifted her head just enough to nuzzle my hand. Her tail gave one weak thump against the metal surface. We went home that night with medication to keep her comfortable. But I knew, deep down, that our time was running out. The next few days became a blur of slow walks, quiet moments, and whispered goodbyes I wasn't ready to say. The vet had given me pills to help manage Daisy's pain, but they felt like fragile bandages trying to hold back an unstoppable flood. I took time off work, something I should have done ages ago. I wanted every remaining second with her to count. We sat together in the backyard one sunny afternoon, Daisy stretched out on an old blanket. Her head rested on my lap as I gently ran my fingers through her fur. The sun warmed both of us, and for a moment, if I closed my eyes, I could pretend everything was normal. "Do you remember when I first brought you home?" I said softly, half expecting her to lift her head in recognition. "You barked at the vacuum cleaner like it owed you money." Her tail gave a faint wag. I chuckled despite the tightness in my chest. "And you used to steal my socks. You'd parade around the living room with them like they were trophies." The tears came then, quiet and steady. Daisy let out a contented sigh, her eyes half closed as if she was listening to every word. Night, I brought her into my bed, something I used to avoid because she'd sprawl out and somehow take up more space than seemed physically possible for a medium-sized dog. But now, I didn't care. I wanted her close. One morning, Lisa messaged me again, "Thinking of you both. Please let me know if there's anything I can do." I stared at the message for a long time before finally typing back, "Thank you, Lisa. But I think Daisy is staying with me until the end." She replied almost instantly, "She's lucky to have you. Take care of each other." The days blurred into nights, and the moments between Daisy's tail wags and her labored breaths grew shorter. I could see it in her eyes. She was tired. So very tired. The last night we had together, I laid down next to her on the living room floor, her head resting on my arm. I whispered to her through quiet sobs, telling her over and over how much I loved her, how grateful I was for every day we'd had together. "Thank you for being mine," I said softly. Her tail gave one last, faint wag, and in the quiet stillness of that night, Daisy took her final breath. The house felt unbearably quiet after Daisy was gone. Her bed was still in the corner of the living room, her leash still hung by the door, and her food bowl, half full from the last time I'd tried coaxing her to eat, sat untouched in the kitchen. Everywhere I looked, there were reminders of her. I thought about packing her things away, maybe donating them, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. Not yet. Instead, I sat on the floor next to her empty bed, clutching her favorite toy, a ratty old stuffed fox with one ear missing, and let the grief wash over me. The guilt came too, sharp and unrelenting. Had I waited too long to take her to the vet? Should I have let Lisa take her when I had the chance? Would she have been happier in a home with someone who wasn't constantly stretched thin by work and exhaustion? I tried to remind myself that, in the end, Daisy hadn't been alone. She'd been with me, her head on my arm, feeling safe and loved in her final moments. But the what-ifs lingered. And the days that followed, I moved through life in a fog. I went back to work, answered emails, attended meetings, but I felt hollow. Every time I came home, I caught myself listening for the sound of her paws clicking against the floor, her excited bark when I walked through the door, but there was only silence. Lisa sent me another message a week later. "I'm so sorry for your loss. Daisy was so loved, and she was lucky to have you by her side until the end." I stared at her words, fresh tears spilling onto my cheeks. I wanted to reply, to thank her for her kindness, but I couldn't find the words. Grief is strange. Some moments it felt like a crushing weight on my chest, and other times it felt like a dull ache, a bruise that never fully faded. One evening, after another long day at work, I sat down on the couch and picked up Daisy's leash. I ran my fingers along the worn leather strap, thinking about all the walks we'd taken. All the times she'd tugged excitedly toward a squirrel or plopped down stubbornly when she decided she was done walking. I realized then that Daisy had given me so much more than I ever gave her. She'd been my anchor through hard days, my reason to get up on mornings when I couldn't find one, and my reminder that love doesn't always need words. For the first time since she'd passed, I allowed myself to smile. Grief doesn't have an end date. It doesn't follow a timeline or a checklist. Some days, it feels like a dull ache, manageable, distant. Other days, it hits like a punch to the chest. A month after Daisy passed, I finally gathered her things. Her leash, her bed, the stuffed fox with the missing ear. I packed them carefully into a box, pausing every few minutes to catch my breath as tears threatened to spill over again. I didn't donate them. I couldn't. Instead, I tucked the box into the back of my closet somewhere safe. Out of sight, but never out of mind. One afternoon, I took a walk by myself. It felt strange not to have Daisy pulling eagerly ahead, stopping every 5 feet to sniff at something invisible to me. I found myself wandering to a park we used to visit, a small patch of green with a bench under an old oak tree. I sat there for a long time, watching people pass by with their own dogs. Puppies chasing after balls, older dogs lounging by their owners' feet. The ache in my chest was sharp, but it wasn't just sadness, it was gratitude, too. Daisy had been mine. For 3 years, she'd been mine. I pulled out my phone and opened Lisa's last message. My fingers hovered over the screen before I finally typed, "Thank you for your kindness, Lisa. Daisy was so loved. I'm glad I was able to stay with her until the end." Her reply came minutes later. She knew she was loved. "You gave her the greatest gift, your presence. Take care of yourself." I sat there on that bench, the sun filtering through the leaves, and let the moment settle over me. When I finally stood up to leave, I felt lighter somehow. The grief was still there, yes, but it felt gentler. Like Daisy had left a part of herself behind in every corner of my life. In the quiet mornings, in the empty space by the couch, in the faint scent of her shampoo still clinging to her old blanket. I walked home that afternoon, not because I had to, but because I wanted to, and in every step, I carried her with me.